On April the 5th, 2010, 29 miners lost their lives in the Upper Big Branch mine.
So today I've directed Secretary Solis, Assistant Secretary Main, and Administrator Strickland to work closely with state mining officials to press ahead with this investigation so we can help make sure a disaster like this never happens again.
Breaking news in America's coal mining country. We now know
the coal mine that exploded Monday has a history of safety violations.
A listening report out tonight on the West Virginia coal mine disaster. Report out tonight on the West Virginia coal mine disaster.
On April 5th, the United States suffered the worst mine disaster in more than a generation.
Government investigators, politicians, and the media claimed that a poor safety record and failures by management allowed a methane buildup that ignited and created a coal dust explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine. In their call for the prosecution of company officials, they have ignored evidence that points to the truth about what really happened.
Owners responsible for conditions in the Upper Big Branch mine should be held accountable for decisions they made and preventive measures they failed to take.
Numerous politicians and government regulators promised that a tragedy like Upper Big Branch would never happen again.
We've got to change something here to make sure it doesn't happen again.
We cannot turn back the clock and right the wrongs that occurred on April 5th, 2010. But we can act to make sure that an accident of this magnitude never happens again.
Our miners and their families and the memories of those lost deserve nothing less.
Every miner who goes to work every day must be able to return home safely to their families at the end of that shift, and Congress has an obligation to ensure that that remains the case.
To ensure that such tragedies never occur again.
I hope and pray that we will never again endure a tragedy like the Upper Big Branch deaths, and I will work every day to make sure that we don't.
Well, it's a hollow promise. You're not going to prevent accidents from happening unless you fully understand what caused the accident, and you can prevent whatever caused it from happening.
Despite all of their promises, none of these politicians nor regulators have done anything to prevent an accident like Upper Big Branch from ever happening again. Don Blankenship, former CEO of MSHA Energy, believes the forensic evidence points to a truth that has been buried and ignored.
The government's approach seems to be that if they threaten supervisors and arrest people and criticize them in the public and so forth, that somehow their behavior will change and explosions won't occur. But explosions and accidents occur when physical circumstances come into being that result in the accident. And many times the people that are involved in the mining or in any other industry simply are not able to prevent it. It's not a matter of punishing them that's going to keep it from happening again.
Even though they promised 4 years ago that they would ensure that UBB would never happen again, some politicians still claim they don't know all the facts about what caused the explosion.
I never heard that. I always assumed that there was methane, you know.
But now they have no excuse.
Blankenship delivered letters to the Charleston office of U.S. Senator Joe Manchin and to Governor Earl Ray Tomlin's reception room at the state capitol. The letter asks 5 questions, among them if Manchin and Tomlin have asked for analyses of gas samples collected by the Mine Safety and Health Administration and what they have attempted or have done to prevent another similar disaster.
The 3 government investigative reports essentially blame poor upper-level management at MSHA Energy, the company that owned the mine, for bad mine management, inadequate rock dusting, inoperative water sprays, missing cutting bits, and float coal dust for the explosion. The problem with this theory is that the upper-level management team and many of the workers that were meeting the challenges of day-to-day mining at Upper Big Branch had both been in place during the mine's entire 16 years of operation. Coal mines deal with issues such as lost cutter bits, imperfect rock dusting, and missing or damaged water sprays on a daily basis. If mines experiencing these issues often exploded, then the industry would have explosions every day. But mines don't explode every day. Don Blankenship says that MSHA has lost sight of its purpose.
MSHA was first formed, it appears from the way the laws are written, that they were truly to be there to help you and to help you be safer, whereas now it's a police force that wants to either cause disruption in the mining or to write a lot of paper, and many times it causes a lack of focus on true issues.
But not only does MSHA act like a police force, they also act like a dictatorship when it comes to many mine practices. At UBB, MSHA had insisted on the use of their preferred ventilation system, and this plan was fully implemented the weekend before the mine explosion.
At UBB, the ventilation plan, which Joe Main, the head of MSHA, testified in front of Congress was not their plan, was the only plan we could get them to approve. So they're able to say they don't write ventilation plans, but the truth of the matter is they don't approve any ventilation plan that they don't favor.
The U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that MSHA could force a coal mine to accept the government's ventilation plan, despite the company's knowledge of their own mine and engineering expertise. Stan Sobolewski, who served on the board of directors for MSHA Energy and headed the mining engineering departments at Virginia Tech and Penn State University, explains.
What you find is that the person will never put anything in writing other than the fact that he's rejected the plan, but then he will orally tell the people what it is that they have to put in the plan. So they end up putting a plan in that's not really their plan, it's his plan, but then he turns around and says, well, it's your plan, you have to live with it now.
After MSHA won the court case, which granted them the authority to force a coal mine to use a government-preferred ventilation system, they chose UBB as the first mine to exercise this judicially secured power. MSHA proceeded to insist that Upper Big Branch accept this plan, and through a combination of violations and plan denials, left UBB no choice but to make the changes necessary to implement the MSHA plan.
And the law only requires 30,000 CFM of air. We had 120,000 when we were operating the mine the way we wanted to operate it. When we got through making the changes that the government wanted to make, we were around 50,000. So even though we were complying with the law, we didn't have nearly the amount of air that we believed was proper. So when the government comes in and tells you that it's a better ventilation plan to take 60% of the air off the face, then you know that they are not looking at it mathematically or scientifically. I think it's common sense that if you have a coal mine that's performed well for 15 years and not had issues with its ventilation, that you need to be careful about making a change in it.
Ironically, even though the ventilation plan in use at UBB was the MSHA plan, their investigative reports partially blame the explosion on inadequate ventilation, effectively blaming themselves. Additionally, MSHA ignores their own gas samples and their own chemical analysis, which clearly prove that the gas present in the mine at the time of the explosion was natural gas and not coal bed methane gas. They say in their investigative report that coal bed gas built up in the mine and a spark caused a fire, which then led to an explosion. Their report thus contradicts both the forensic evidence and common sense. Incredibly, even today, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin says he does not know that the mine exhausted natural gas and not coal bed methane gas.
But looking at MSHA's own data about what was coming out the Bandytown fan afterwards, after the explosion, is natural gas. And it seems to me that's a problem.
Well, methane, you mean the methane?
Methane and ethane, which is characteristic of natural gas and not coal bed.
Okay. Yeah, coal bed methane, then they hit pockets of, I never heard that. I always assumed that there was methane, some of the mines are more gaseous.
Well, actually
than
methane,
others.
but with the ethane it means,
oh my goodness,
it's a clear signature that it's natural gas, at least that's what I'm told.
Yeah, yeah.
Coal bed methane is released in the normal process of mining coal. But natural gas has to come from another source, such as an inundation from an underground reservoir. Martin Hertzberg is an expert in mine explosions and consults for MSHA, the Department of Energy, and the National Academy of Sciences.
An inundation is a special situation in which a large reservoir of methane breaks through into the mine.
Coal bed gas in the coal seams at Upper Big Branch is virtually pure methane. However, natural gas also contains ethane, and MSHA found enough ethane at the ventilation exhaust to confirm a natural gas inundation. Dr. Patrick Hatcher, a Batten-endowed chair in physical sciences at Old Dominion University, examined MSHA's data.
The fact that you have such a high amount of methane and ethane seems to suggest that it's some other gas. This is more like a natural gas. It looks like natural gas.
Gary Aho, a geologist with 45 years' experience in geophysical engineering, explains the geology behind gas inundations.
We typically have methane gases associated with coal mining. We do have incidents that are geologic anomalies, as we call them, that we didn't anticipate.
The deeper you go, the higher the pressure. And the deeper the reservoir, the higher the pressure, and the faster the flow.
Coal bed methane is a normal part of mining operations, and ventilation systems are designed to safely remove it from the mine. Natural gas, on the other hand, can inundate the mine from a high-pressure reservoir, overwhelming the mine's ventilation system. Both of these gases are highly explosive.
Yeah, they're both the same phenomena. Small amount of higher hydrocarbons still gives you an explosion. But the characteristic signal of a deep reservoir is higher concentrations of the heavier hydrocarbons. The coal seam by itself, when you do analysis of the methane emitted from the coal seam, you get mostly, almost completely methane, pure methane. On the other hand, a reservoir of natural gas deep below the coal seam will give you typically a signature with much higher concentrations.
Forensic evidence indicates that natural gas inundated the mine through a crack that was found in the mine's floor.
Now, occasionally, you may end up with a fault or a fracture system that is full of gas, more than the typical rock would have. And when they drill and blast or cut with a mining into those seams, they can, in fact, exceed that explosive level of gases and end up with an unfortunate explosion.
It's a very rare occurrence, but apparently there must be a high-pressure reservoir somewhere near there where there's actually an inflow, a massive inflow of gas from a nearby, apparently, gas reservoir.
There were cracks in the floor at Upper Big Branch, and MSHA refused to allow these cracks to be fully evaluated before they were disturbed. It is highly likely that natural gas inundated the mine through these cracks.
If there's a failure of the strata, the natural gas reservoir at a high pressure, once the strata failed, would eject in an enormous amount. There would be a huge disturbance. It would hiss. Not only would it make noise, but it'd kick up lots of rocks from the crack through which it's flowing.
Natural gas was still present at the Bandytown fan several days after the accident. In fact, the concentration of methane at the exhaust fan in the hours and days after the explosion registered nearly double the normal readings for methane that would be present while the mine was active. It is important to note that these readings were taken while the mine was idle. This proves beyond a doubt that natural gas inundated the mine. MSHA, politicians, and the media have ignored the truth about what happened at the Upper Big Branch mine on April 5, 2010, and instead blamed Massey Energy Management for placing profits above the safety of its workers. But let's take a look at some of their allegations and why they simply don't make sense. MSHA claims that the evidence points to three major failings by Massey: an unsafe level of coal dust in the mine, inadequate rock dusting, and poor ventilation. However, the ventilation system in place was MSHA's plan, and there is no evidence to support their accusation as to coal dust or the condition of the rock dusting. In fact, the focus on the mine by MSHA inspectors prior to the explosion and other evidence suggests just the opposite. MSHA says that high levels of methane from the coal bed served as the original fuel for the explosion, which then caused a secondary coal dust explosion. However, as we learned earlier, natural gas was present at the mine's exhaust fan in the hours and days after the disaster. This fact puts into question MSHA's claims about the fuel for the explosion. Furthermore, MSHA said that the Upper Big Branch mine was not adequately rock dusted, thus creating the opportunity for a coal dust explosion. Rock dusting is the mandatory spraying of mine surfaces with pulverized rock to help prevent coal dust combustion.
Normally, coal dust is explosive, so the regulations require that be inerted with rock dust to about 80%. It's usually limestone.
MSHA's explosion specialist determined that Upper Big Branch miners were not adequately rock dusting the mine, and that this allowed a coal dust explosion to occur. However, his conclusions are suspect. This same MSHA specialist claimed that inadequate rock dusting was a contributing factor in an explosion at Jim Walter Resources No. 5 mine, which occurred in 2001 and claimed the lives of 13 miners. Independent explosion expert Martin Hertzberg also investigated Jim Walter No. 5 and came up with a much different conclusion.
In the Jim Walters No. 5 mine, it was quite obvious. You went in, and at the entry of the mine, everything was nice and white. It was completely rock dusted. The minute you got into the area where there had been an explosion, everything was jet black.
MSHA based many of its conclusions about conditions in the mine prior to the explosion by looking at the conditions after the explosion. Hertzberg states that you cannot gauge rock dusting by looking at an explosion's after effects.
The explosion is such enormous disturbance in the mine. The pressures are so high, dust gets kicked around, chunks of coal get banged into equipment and pulverized. You cannot tell that. And it's an insult to miners to imply that they would go work in a section that looked as black as that.
Court documents from the Jim Walter No. 5 case show that the judge and other experts considered the MSHA's specialist opinions to be suspect. At Upper Big Branch, he ignored the evidence of a natural gas inundation and determined that improper rock dusting led to a coal dust explosion. Martin Hertzberg has problems with his assessment and says that miners would know better than to work in such conditions.
The minute he got into that black section, red flags would go up. He'd turn around, go back, and he'd say, "Get that section rock dusted. I'm not going to work in a section that is not rock dusted." That's enough evidence to tell you that you cannot determine conditions that existed before an explosion by conditions that exist after the explosion.
In addition to questions raised about MSHA's explosion specialist, the credentials of Joe Main, the head of MSHA, are not stellar either. Main has no formal college education and very little mining experience. He spent much of his career as an office employee at the United Mine Workers of America, which is part of the AFL-CIO, an organization which donated large sums of money to the Obama campaign. His association with this organization brings into question his motives for ignoring the forensic evidence. MSHA, the United Mine Workers of America, politicians, as well as the media, counter Hertzberg's argument by claiming that Massey had a culture of intimidation that refused to allow miners to voice concerns about safety.
But there were people that were intimidated and afraid, and it was production ahead of safety. The perception and what I took away from talking to the families that lost their loved ones, those 29 miners, the majority of them believed that it was production first, production second, production last. More so than we're going to shut this down, stop it until we make it safe. And I heard that story over and over again. I don't have the facts and proof, but I'm sure the investigations will prove all that out.
Massey miners tell a much different story. According to WSAZ television, an independently conducted and confidential survey of Massey underground miners found that 91% believed that the company's S1, or Safety First program, made Massey mines safer places to work than competitors' mines and safer than required by law. It stands to reason that miners would know better about conditions in the mine than would family members.
We had a safety standards program, and the safety standards program was S1, but safety is job 1, and productivity was job 2. So it was S1 and P2.
Although Senator Manchin, other politicians, and MSHA claim that Massey put profits above safety, former Massey miners speaking on condition of anonymity for fear of MSHA reprisals say that Massey always approved requested expenditures for safety improvements, thus showing that the company was willing to reduce profits to improve safety in the mine. MSHA clearly mismanaged the UBB investigation by ignoring their own forensic evidence and by their fascination with the public popularity of unsupported accusations that Massey put profits before safety. Their dictatorship over the investigation allowed them to omit their own failings from their report. Their politically motivated mindset compelled them to put forth headline-catching accusations without evidence. Although there are many examples, perhaps the best example of MSHA's dictator approach to regulation is the idling of continuous miner dust scrubbers at many mines.
A scrubber will clean out 98% of the bad air, bad dust, those contaminants that's actually generated by mining. The air that comes out the discharge of this scrubber system, it's 12 times cleaner with it running versus going back to the old system like we used to mine.
Don Blankenship explains why these scrubbers are so important.
Cutting the coal, which creates dust, with a machine, and when that dust is sucked in to like a vacuum cleaner, and that air passes through a filter and simply comes out the other side. So a good part of that dust collects on the filter. And it has 3 positive effects. 1 is it increases visibility, which is always important. 2 is it prevents the dust from getting in the lungs and causing black lung. And 3, it takes that coal dust out of the return airways, which reduces the chance of an explosion.
Other miners, also speaking on condition of anonymity, expressed concern about MSHA forcing mines to turn off their scrubbers. Many of these miners were fearful of black lung disease.
And respirable dust is what causes the lung problems when you're mining. And why in the world they would want, they would force a company not to run that scrubber is beyond me.
When told about this MSHA practice, Senator Manchin promised to check into it.
I'm not aware of that. I'm glad you've made me aware of that, and I will check into it. I was not aware that they're shutting down basically the scrubbing on those, because there was a scrubbing, as I understood before, that was on the machine, or as the machine continuous miner was cutting.
This MSHA mandate forces miners to shut off equipment that they know protects their own health and safety. After being denied the opportunity to speak with MSHA head Joe Main, Massey miner Buddy Mayer told the Mining Accident News, "The scrubber is the best tool that ever came along. I've already put in 32 years, but these younger guys are breathing dust all the time, and they're going to suffer black lung. Yet he ain't got a couple minutes to talk with us."
There is no co-operator in the United States that I'm aware of that would ever turn off one of those scrubbers. And yet, the government makes them turn off the scrubber.
Speaking to the same publication, Massey miner Sean Turley said, "You almost feel like a guinea pig. Without dust controls on these continuous miners, all the coal miners are breathing in dust the whole shift. Those scrubbers took away that problem. It just don't make sense." MSHA continues to dictate mine practices to mine operators. Just like they did at UBB 4 years ago, MSHA continues today to force mines to do things that the mines know are less safe and less healthy. In doing so, MSHA ignores academic studies, sciences, new technologies, clearly available facts, common sense, historical results, and even other government agencies, such as the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, which is the federal agency responsible for conducting research and making recommendations for the prevention of work-related injury and illness. NIOSH recently issued a report confirming that the running of the scrubbers was beneficial for coal miners. Because of MSHA's capricious dictatorship, NIOSH is unable to advance or even to maintain mine safety. This type of abuse of power will not help keep the promise of preventing UBB from ever happening again.
To make sure it doesn't happen again.
Never happens again.
Never occur again.
That we will never again endure a tragedy like the Upper Big Branch deaths.
Never happens again.
It has been 4 years since the UBB accident, and still today, many politicians claim that they don't know about the natural gas inundation. Instead, they choose to believe MSHA's flawed and self-serving theories. When interviewed for the documentary Upper Big Branch Never Again, Senator Joe Manchin was asked about MSHA's evidence that shows natural gas exhausting from the mine and the forced idling of scrubbers. The senator claimed not to know about these issues and promised to investigate.
Coal bed methane, and they hit pockets of me. I never heard that. I'm not aware of that. I'm glad you've made me aware of that, and I will check into it.
However, instead of addressing these issues, Senator Manchin simply attacked the documentary's producers, threatened to sue them, and called for the film's removal from YouTube. The senator went on to tell ABC News,
I believe that Don has blood on his hands, and I believe that justice will be done. I've got to believe that.
Senator Manchin resorted to intimidation and coercion while attempting to restrict the filmmakers and Don Blankenship's rights to free speech, showing that the senator is apparently more interested in the safety of his political career than he is in the safety of miners. 2 weeks after the film's release, Don Blankenship paid personal visits to Senator Manchin's and other elected officials' offices to hand-deliver an open letter to the lawmakers.
Jen, Don Blankenship spent a busy morning in the capital city, hand-delivering correspondence and addressing a national audience about the documentary he produced, Upper Big Branch Never Again.
In his open letter to these legislators, Don Blankenship posed 5 simple questions. Have you personally looked at the UBB gas samples? What have you done to prevent UBB from happening again? Do you believe you have a responsibility for miner safety? Are you aware MSHA is requiring miner dust scrubbers to be turned off? And are you aware that some new legislation could make miners safer? As of the release of this film, these questions have neither been answered publicly nor privately. On the day of the explosion, there were 2 major differences from the conditions that existed at Upper Big Branch at any time during its 16 years of operation. Neither of these had anything to do with rock dusting, equipment maintenance, or who was working in or managing the mine. The first meaningful difference was an MSHA-dictated ventilation plan that significantly lessened the mine's airflow, which was completed the weekend before the disaster. The second and most meaningful difference was that immediately before the explosion, the mine was inundated with a huge and sudden release of natural gas. Why would 3 separate government investigative reports ignore the evidence of natural gas in the mine?
MSHA sort of has a dictatorship over what's going on in the mining industry. And same thing is true in an accident investigation. Instead of having 2 independent groups in the government, one to regulate the mines and one to inspect accidents or investigate accidents, we have just the one. So effectively, MSHA is able to investigate themselves, and therefore anytime they have an investigation, it's going to be the company or someone else's fault and not theirs.
If politicians truly want to improve the health and safety of coal miners, they must end MSHA's capricious dictatorship. Firstly, UBB must be re-examined, particularly the fuel for the explosion and the MSHA-dictated ventilation changes. Moreover, MSHA can no longer be allowed to investigate itself, and future accident investigations must be done independent of MSHA. All continuous miner dust scrubbers must be immediately turned back on, and NIOSH must be empowered to play a major role in developing mine regulation policies by making use of their scientific studies. There are dozens of other legislative changes that must be made in order to keep the politicians' promise, as well as for the sake of our miners.
In the UBB case, it's clear to me we had a natural gas explosion, and that nothing that the industry is doing is going to prevent it from happening again, despite the politicians' promises to the contrary. And that's what this documentary is all about, that if you're truly going to improve coal mine safety or industrial safety or even environmental stewardship, you first have to know what happened and what you can tangibly do that will prevent it from happening again. If we don't do any more than we've done, UBB will happen again.